Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with a treasury of common sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
He's here again on a Thursday morning, Leith Van Onselen. Hope you're well, mate.
I am good, thanks, Luke. How about yourself?
Oh, not too bad at all. Not too bad at all. I don't know what to make of the inflation numbers, which is why we have geniuses like you on the program. What did you make of those numbers yesterday? And does that send the RBA into, the room with no mirrors to talk about an interest rate rise?
Yeah, unfortunately, the numbers were bad. So inflation came in higher than expected, unfortunately, by pretty much all economists, which is a bad set of numbers. So basically, the headline inflation number, so that's the one you read about at the top, came in at 1.2% over the quarter, and that was basically 0.1% higher than what the economists' forecasts were. But the more worrying thing is the underlying inflation. So that's basically when they strip away these volatile items. That came in at 1.2%, which is above also above economists' expectations, 1.1%, and the annual figures are also higher. And unfortunately, inflation's tracking the trim to mean inflation, which is basically when you strip away the volatiles. That's now tracking above the RBA's forecast of what they had in their statement of monetary policy. So basically, what it says is that inflation's higher than they wanted, higher than they forecast. It's also broader than they expected, so it's not just been driven by petrol, which gets stripped out from that underlying inflation. Basically, about 40% of items in the CPI basket are rising at a fairly swift pace, which means that it's actually a fairly broad-based increase in inflation across all these areas. And surprise, surprise, Luke, we talk about it every week. The key drivers were housing. So basically, new dwelling prices and rents accounted for a quarter of the CPI that we got over the September quarter. Also, we've had a nearly 15% rise in electricity prices over the past year, and of course we've got petrol prices have gone up as well by a lot. So that's basically the three main drivers of the inflation problem, unfortunately. But housing is the big one that's been obviously driven by the Albanese government's extreme immigration program. So good old-fashioned elbowflation is helping to push inflation up, and it's going to potentially lead to the Reserve Bank hiking again on Melbourne Cup. Yeah. I think that's pretty much the consensus now. Like most economists and markets now think that there's a very good chance that they'll hike by 0.25% on Melbourne Cup Day, and maybe a potential another one maybe in December. Wow. Hopefully that's all. And this is a concern because obviously, we've got consumers copping in the neck. We've got negative real retail sales, negative real household consumption. That's once you adjust for inflation, and obviously per capita recession and the unemployment rate, although officially it hasn't really risen much, but all the other measures are basically showing the labour market's weakening, and there's also some sort of forward-looking indicators saying that wage growth is going to come off as well. So it's, we've basically got this weakening domestic economy, but unfortunately stubbornly high inflation, in part caused by flooding the place with, 600,000 people over a year, which is pushing up all the stuff.
Yeah, I was watching the Treasurer's press conference, and I've read the transcript afterwards, and I thought everything was hunky-dory. He talked about all the support, the billions of dollars of support that he's given Australian families in the way of electricity price support and childcare and all these things. And, everything's now because of what's gone on in Israel with the attack, that horrific attack by Hamas. Don't tell me he's trying to pull the wool over our eyes like he's tried to in the area of wages, Leith.
Mate, he's trying to pull our eyes on a lot of things. Basically, Jim Chalmers, so for example, we all know the rental market's absolutely stuffed because of this massive immigration we've got. He's basically saying that, they increased Commonwealth rent assistance, which goes to about a million renters. So they increased that by 15%. And he said that basically if he hadn't done that, rents would have gone up by 2.5% in the quarter. Instead, they only went up by 2.2%. Well,
that's all
thanks, Jimbo. All you're saying is that, it only went up ridiculously, but it could have gone up even more ridiculously had you not given the subsidy, which it shouldn't have really gone up at all, or not much at all, except that you decide to, open the immigration floodgates. So it's kind of, gaslighting us. But, you are certainly right. He's basically argued that that Australians have had a record, the biggest increase in their salaries and wages in more than a decade under his government. But he's conveniently left out the fact that they're actually going backwards at the fastest rate in generations once you adjust for inflation. So he's just used the nominal figures, and he was actually pulled up by ABC Fact Check, who basically said that it was misleading because he's just looking at the headline result, not the result after inflation. And when you actually look at the wage growth, households' real wages are actually back at March 2009 levels after falling about 7.5% since since this inflation shock came in. So, we actually had a record income loss, once you adjust for inflation. But here's good old Jim Chalmers saying that we're better off than ever. And he's also said the same thing with employment. He said his government's created 500,000 jobs, and that, it's the biggest jobs gained by a government on record, and blah, 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 forgetting the fact that the population's a lot larger, but also the jobs growth hasn't kept up with the immigration. So the unemployment rate's actually risen. And, especially if you look at these other measures like Roy Morgan and, the other measures that are more timely than the ABS. So, it's this whole sort of immigration economy he's spitting. He's just looking at, he also says that he's delivered economic growth in tough times when actually per capita economic growth is going backwards because of this extreme population growth. So he's kind of gilding the lily here.
Yeah.
And gaslighting us, which is probably why the government's on the nose.
There's, and we'll get to that, but you've got in macrobusiness.com.au, there's a terrific chart that looks at real wage growth amongst modern treasurers. Keating gets a tick, Dawkins gets a tick, Costello gets a tick, Swan gets a tick, Hockey gets a little tick, Morrison, believe it or not, gets a tick. The ones that get across are Willis, Frydenberg, and the biggest of all, Jimbo. Yet he stood there yesterday and said, "How good are we?" It's ridiculous. I think it's beautiful use of gaslighting by you. And you alluded to this. This is how we get to a point where, for the first time in the history of this parliament, so 18 months, if an election were to be held now, according to Roy Morgan polling, the coalition would win. Can you believe it?
I know it is quite unbelievable that basically, Albanese has achieved in such a little time, worse than what happened to Kevin Rudd. So if you all remember when Kevin Rudd came in, he was popular for about a year or so.
Yeah. And
then he basically declared he was for a big Australia, and then he was on the nose, and they booted him out and replaced him with Julia Gillard. And we're kind of seeing similar again. And look, bear in mind this is only one opinion poll, right? So they do jump around a bit, but the trend has definitely been bad for the APL government. So it doesn't matter what poll you look at, they've been losing voter support. And this latest Roy Morgan poll actually has the coalition ahead, 50.5% to 49.5% on a two-party preferred. But more interestingly, the coalition's leading a long way in primary vote, according to Roy Morgan. So basically, ALP's vote fell 3% to 32%. That's on primary vote, whereas the coalition's rose by 2% to 36%. So basically, the coalition under Peter Dutton, who's not a very liked, I'd say, opposition leader, he's not that popular, is leading the Albo government, according to this poll, on both two-party preferred and primary. And the reason why is because, another survey came out from JWS Research that was published in the AFR this week, and it basically asked Australians, what are they concerned about? And shock horror, they're concerned about cost of living, number one. 81% of people surveyed are most concerned about that. And 56% are concerned about hospitals, healthcare and ageing. And 56 are also concerned about housing interest rates, and 42% are economy and finances. And so those are the top four concerns. And those are four things that are basically being made worse by the federal government's extreme immigration program. So, cost of living is obviously, going up in part because we've got all these extra people competing for things. Hospitals, healthcare and ageing, getting worse. Well, at least in the case of hospitals, we've got less hospital spots, et cetera, because we're not keeping up with the extra demand. Housing, obviously, we've got the rental crisis. And economy and finances, well, we're in a per capita recession, and obviously people's finances are copping it with this negative real wage growth. And basically, that's the real reason why this why voters are now rebelling against the Albanese government, because they're copping it in the neck, and they don't feel like the government's doing anything about it. They're lying about it. In the case of Jim Chalmers, he's lying about it constantly, being gaslighted, while they focus on these things that they don't really care as much about. For example, the voice, which, let's face it, is insignificant. Like, the voice is one of those things that people care about when the times. Well, some people will care about when the times are good, and you can look at these big picture things.
Exactly.
But when you're struggling to pay your mortgage, you can't get a rental property, you're forced into share housing, you're struggling to pay your bills. People are like, I don't care about this. I'm worried about surviving.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Basically, the government is, people don't feel like they're surviving very well. Their living standards are falling. They're watching as the population's growing at a rate it never has before. And on the news, and they're seeing these rental crises. They're talking to their friends and families who are, seeing their rents go up at a ridiculous rate, or they can't find a rental property. They're having to move back home, all this sort of stuff. They're struggling to put food on the table. So obviously they're getting angry. And if the Albanese government doesn't turn this situation around soon and doesn't start actually, addressing the things that people care about, they could potentially be a one-term government. And that would be amazing with Peter Dutton as leader of the opposition.
True.
And given how on the nose the former Morrison government was when they left, that ALP could stuff it up in such a short period of time. And and it's a very real possibility the way this is going.
Great stuff. Always good to chat, my friend. Stay well. I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, no worries, Luke. Thanks, mate.
And don't forget macrobusiness.com.au for my listeners. All this brilliant analysis is there for you every day. macrobusiness.com.au. That was Leith Van Onselen.